Unit 2. The Inner Self. Section 1. Listening Comprehension. 1. Listen to the following passages and then decide whether the following statements are true or false.
1. I worry that in our collective memory, the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have begun to fade. I worry about nuclear weapons falling into the hands of terrorists or ruthless dictators. I worry about nuclear weapons already in the arsenals of democracies, because as long as these weapons exist, there is no absolute guarantee against the disastrous consequences of their theft, sabotage, or accidental launch. And even democracies are not immune to radical shifts in their security anxieties and nuclear policies.
2. I hope that a side effect of globalization will be an enduring realization that there is only one human race, to which we all belong. I hope that dynamic leaders within national governments, international institutions, and civil society will step forward with the vision, the integrity, and the will to reverse the inertia of fear and insecurity. I hope we can all agree to sit down together and to start anew.
3. If the reforms succeed and their economies pick up, France and Germany may yet surprise with a strong performance after years of relative weakness. If both countries would fully embrace labor and product market reforms, the International Monetary Fund has calculated that their GDP could be 10% higher than otherwise. There is, in other words, a high upside risk very much worth taking.
4. Cannes makes a fortune every year by hosting entertainment industry events. The city takes so much money from the pockets of its visitors, indeed, that Hollywood studios periodically threaten to move the bash to Barcelona.
5. An Iranian earthquake specialist said in October that earthquake education in Iran was very poor, making people fatalistic about taking precautions. Most people think that what God wills will happen. This is absolutely wrong. This thinking is poisonous, said Bahram Akeshe, professor of geophysics at Tehran University.
6. The 1982 Law of the Sea says that a country may claim rights to exploit any continental shelf extending from its territory to a depth of 2,500 meters. The deadline for nations to stake a claim under the treaty is 2009. Russia is claiming much of the Arctic Ocean because of its Siberian shelf extends 2,000 kilometers along a thin promontory called the Lomonosov Ridge to the North Pole.
7. Europeans, led by Britain, are rethinking their long-held belief that university education should be financed almost entirely by the state. 8. Upon their return to Wisconsin, the family consigned the young Wright to a stay on an uncle's farm. The intimate involvement with nature he experienced on the farm made a lasting impression on Wright.
9. The belief that higher education is a citizen's right may have been reasonable when fewer Britons aspired to go to college, but it is quite different when 40% expect to go.
10. In France, where undergraduates pay between €280 and €350 a year, or about $350 to $435, to attend sprawling, chaotic universities, students recently took to the streets to protest against a number of proposed changes that they feared would lead to competition among universities and pave the way for increased privatization and higher tuition fees.
2. Choose the one answer that best fits the meaning of the statement you have heard.
1. Asian women and young girls have been brainwashed to disfigure themselves by undergoing Frankenstein surgery to meet these unreal Western standards of perfect beauty. I guess these young females have been poisoned by watching too many Hollywood movies and reading too many Western trash magazines. They follow these beauty standards blindly.
2. The scope of IT, enabled creative practices, is suggested, but by no means exhausted, by a host of coinages that have recently entered common language: computer graphics, computer-aided design, computer music, computer games, digital photography, digital video, digital media, new media, hypertext, virtual environments, interaction design, and electronic publishing, to name just a few.
3. Although I don't expect there will be a change in this trend anytime soon, we should all remember that there are people all over the world who lack basic health care. We should be using our money to help them instead of boosting our bosoms.
4. I was both interested and repulsed by your cover story on plastic surgery. It is sad that so many people are so self-conscious that they would risk injury and spend their life savings on trying to alter their natural appearance. It does not surprise me, however, that many of the people getting this needless surgery are Asian.
5. I've read that the first breast implants were performed in Japan after World War II, when barrels of industrial silicone were stolen from Japanese docks. This same silicone ended up in hundreds of Japanese prostitutes working the newly arrived invading forces. Of course, Westerners get their share of plastic surgery too, but I think they have less of a cultural identity problem.
6. Imagine pulling into the nearest garage and filling up with whatever happens to be the cheapest fuel that day, be it petrol, ethanol, the active ingredient of booze, or any mixture of the two. Brazilian motorists now can, thanks to an innovation put on the market a few weeks ago.
7. Many people dream of replacing petrol with ethanol. Because ethanol is made from plants, and plants draw their carbon from the atmosphere, burning it would eliminate a source of greenhouse gases and help to stem global warming. But the optimum conditions for burning petrol and ethanol are different, so a well-tuned engine needs to know what fuel it is being fed in order to adjust itself appropriately.
8. A reporter for Time magazine suffered severe shrapnel wounds and lost his hand when he tried to throw away a grenade that had been tossed into a Humvee he was riding in with a photographer and 2 U.S. soldiers.
9. Last week's bombings in Madrid have added a new dimension. If Al-Qaeda were behind the attacks, the message may be that friends of America will be targeted. This interpretation has found credence in Australia, which has firmly aligned itself with Mr. Bush and has also been especially wary of terrorism since more than 100 of its citizens were killed in a Bali nightclub 18 months ago.
10. The last decade has been tough on travel agents. U.S. airlines at first halved and then largely eliminated commissions on domestic flights, forcing many agents to add fees to ticket prices. That led many leisure travelers and business flyers to book their own tickets on the internet. Then the stock market turned and the economy slowed, dragging travel down with it.
Section 2. Reading. Arnie's uphill climb. Prompts. The super movie star turned governor Arnold Schwarzenegger has morphed into a different type of fighter. The environmentally proactive Arnie is all out against a new enemy, the worsening climate change. California's confident approach to climate change has inspired America and the world, but things do not look so good in the state itself. In most parts of the world, climate change is a worrying subject. Not so in California. At a recent gathering of green luminaries, in a film star's house naturally, for that is how seriousness is often established in Los Angeles, the dominant note was self-satisfaction at what the state has already achieved, and perhaps nobody is more smug than Arnold Schwarzenegger. Unlike Al Gore, a presidential candidate turned prophet of environmental doom, California's governor sounds cheerful when talking about climate change. As well he might. It has made his political career. Although California has long been an environmentally conscious state, until recently, Greens were concerned above all with smog and redwood trees. Cost of Dreams, Kevin Starr's authoritative history of contemporary California, published in 2004, does not mention climate change. In that year, though, the newly elected Mr. Schwarzenegger made his first tentative call for Western states to seek alternatives to fossil fuels. Gradually, he noticed that his efforts to tackle climate change met with less resistance and more acclaim than just about all his other policies. These days, it can seem as though he works on nothing else. Mr. Schwarzenegger's transformation from screen warrior to eco-warrior was completed last year when he signed a bill imposing legally enforceable limits on greenhouse gas emissions, a first for America. The bill, which is just 13 pages long, obliges California to cut its emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. That alone is ambitious, considering that the state's population is expected to increase by 42% in the period. But Mr. Schwarzenegger has set up two other targets. He wants the state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 2000 levels by 2010 and to slash them to 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. Thanks mostly to its lack of coal and heavy industry, California is a relatively clean state. If it were a country, it would be the world's 8th biggest economy, but only its 16th biggest polluter. Its big problem is transport, meaning mostly cars and trucks, which account for more than 40% of its greenhouse gas emissions, compared with 32% in America as a whole. The state wants to ratchet down emissions limits on new vehicles beginning in 2009. Mr. Schwarzenegger has also ordered that by 2020, vehicle fuel must produce 10% less carbon in the production as well as the burning, so a simple switch to corn-based ethanol is probably out. Californians of the future will also be expected to use cleaner electricity. The state subsidizes solar power with the intention of creating 1 million power-generating roofs within 10 years. It has in effect banned electricity companies from signing long-term contracts with coal-fired power stations and plans to buy from cleaner sources. In 2002, Gray Davis, then the Democratic governor, signed a bill that committed the state to obtaining a fifth of its power from renewable sources, not including nuclear or large hydroelectric power stations, by 2017. Last year, in a typically cocky gesture, the deadline was brought forward to 2010. All of which is welcome change from business as usual. California has not just inspired other states, It has created a vanguard that ought to be able to prod the federal government into stronger national standards than it would otherwise consider. But California is finding it easier to export its policies than to put them into practice at home. The state's first hurdle, which requires it to generate a fifth of its electricity from renewable sources in 3 years' time, now seems impossibly high. Last year, it managed just 11%. Although the energy companies are eagerly signing up wind and sun farmers, there is simply not enough supply out there, at least at the price the companies want to pay. Meanwhile, the plan to install solar roofs on houses has been stymied by the high cost of photovoltaic panels. Red tape and a requirement temporarily suspended that customers buy additional power at rates that vary according to demand. That would have increased some households' energy bills. Despite making some optimistic assumptions about future contracts, the Public Utilities Commission has concluded that the state will miss its target for renewables, and the aim of cutting emissions from electricity production to 1990 levels by the end of the next decade may be just as unrealistic. It is a bad sign that California's electricity suppliers are struggling, because electricity is something over which the state wields considerable control. It has less power over car makers who are fighting to prevent California imposing emission standards on them. If they succeed, even temporarily, California's goals will become unreachable. Thanks partly to the lack of rain and snow in California, vehicles stay on the road for a long time. It takes 16 years for half the cars made in a given year to be retired from service. In one way, California's self-confidence is fully justified. It has done more than any other state, let alone the federal government, to fix America's attention on climate change. It has also made it seem as though the problem can be solved, which is why failure would be such bad news. At the moment, California is a beacon to other states. If it fails, it will become an excuse for inaction.